Are the North American and Chinese versions of the Samsung S24 better than the global version? Samsung launched the S24 and S24 Plus in two different variants. Here in Europe, we received the Exynos 2400 chipset, while in North America and China, they've released the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 version. Previously, we saw in the lab test that the Snapdragon variant has better thermals and battery life, but what about a day in the life scenario? I brought the Exynos variant in grey and the Snapdragon variant in black on a day-long bike ride to test how the battery life and thermals would be, especially now the temperatures is above 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm more a scientist, and stay with me because the result of this test can be quite surprising for you. I charged both Galaxies to 100%, put the same SIM card in them with the same carrier and connected them to 5G network. They are on auto brightness. I'm also running the app that I wrote which measures the temperature and battery life over time in the background. I also brought my iPhone 14 on the journey because many of you ask me how I compare it to the S24. I don't have an iPhone 15, but it's very similar to the iPhone 14 apart from the USB-C port. The route we took is part of Eurovelo 6, which mainly goes along the Danube. The part that we are doing today connects Vienna, the capital of Austria, to Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. We had our first stop after an hour and a half for a coffee break. You see the Exynos variant on the right side with 89% battery and 35.5 degrees Celsius, while the Snapdragon variant on the right side has the same battery percentage but is running 1 degree lower at 34.5 degrees Celsius. We had coffee for Lengete, and meanwhile, I started the recording for both phones in 4K. By the end of it, Snapdragon had 83% left and Exynos had 81% left. But that's not all. While sitting in the cafe, I noticed the Snapdragon variant was getting a 4G signal while the Exynos was on 3G signal, which is interesting since the Snapdragon version is imported from Canada. Before we move to the next stage of the trip, I checked the news on both phones to make sure the war hadn't ended yet. We continued our way to Slovakia through these beautiful fields. I tried to capture some videos using both phones. You see the Snapdragon on the right and Exynos on the left side. We took another break after an hour and a half. The S24 Exynos was around 67%, while the S24 Snapdragon was around 73%. The temperature on the Exynos variant was 2 degrees higher than on the Snapdragon. If you remember, I told you I also brought the iPhone 14 for the trip. One of my problems with all Samsung flagship phones is that the face unlock is almost unusable. This is one area where I prefer iPhones. You can see how responsive the iPhone is compared to Samsung. We continued our way to Bratislava, but on the way, we made another quick stop to refresh ourselves and check again whether the World War had broken out or not. Exynos is now at 56% and Snapdragon at 66% battery left. Exynos is around 1 degree higher. The temperature of both phones is a bit too high considering I am only doing web browsing and taking a few photos. What the iPhone base model lacks is a telephoto lens that can be very useful. For example, here I didn't want to be too close to the subject to not appear as a creep. She would probably think I was taking pictures of her while I was only interested in her banana. Going back to the topic of why I still keep the iPhone despite being an Android user is the ecosystem and Apple tags. I have Apple tags everywhere and they only work with the iPhone. Galaxy also has tags, but I don't want to throw all my Apple tags away. I'm not preaching to buy an iPhone though, since it has 60Hz and lacks a telephoto lens. Maybe go for the iPhone 15 Pro if you want to have one, but you know that you are gonna lock yourself in the ecosystem and it will drag you in. Believe me. Speaking of iPhones, the Galaxy S24 design is very similar to an iPhone. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I like how it feels in the hand. It also looks chic and modern. This is one of the reasons you may want to go for the S24 rather than the S23. It's almost 4 in the evening and the Exynos is at 41%, while the Snapdragon is at 50%. Exynos is again 1.5 degrees hotter than the Snapdragon, but both of them are too hot for doing light tasks outdoors. Before we continued our journey, I once more checked whether it made sense to continue our journey or if the war has already ended. We arrived at the border of Austria and Slovakia and I captured some pictures. Again, the telephoto lens of the Galaxy S24 was very useful in this scenario to capture the video of this bird hovering in the wind. Now at the border, Exynos is at 28% while the Snapdragon is at 42%. This time, Exynos is slightly cooler than the Snapdragon. Once more, I realized the Snapdragon had a better connection. It was on 5G, while the Exynos could barely get a 2G signal. Here is a good moment that I answer a very common question in the comment section. So I got this Snapdragon variant through Canada and it was sent by a friend by DHL. But if you really want to import a Snapdragon, buy a version from Hong Kong because the carrier and the bands are more compatible with Europe. I tested the Snapdragon version that I bought from Canada in Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Austria, and it worked without any issues. Actually, it worked better than the S24 Exynos version. I don't recommend going to this route. Just know if you get from Hong Kong, for one, you're gonna lose the eSIM capabilities, and for two, the warranty is gonna be a bit shaky. So I don't recommend it, but if you must, then get one version from Hong Kong and not from North America. We continued the last part of the journey to enter the city of Bratislava. I was very much looking forward to going inside the city because there are so many good restaurants there where you can dine out. The entrance to the city is also very beautiful. I definitely recommend doing a day trip there if you plan to visit Vienna at some point. Once again, I tested the camera of the iPhone 14 compared to the S24, especially when zooming into the subject, and I much prefer the Samsung one. The telephoto lens is something I didn't know I needed one until I had it on my camera. After strolling a bit in the city, we decided to go for dinner. Snapdragon is now at 33%, while Exynos is only at 17%. This frankly would make me nervous if I only had Exynos on my pocket. I could theoretically bring a power bank, but that would be just another thing to carry on the trip. As you can see, I tracked the activity with both phones, which was around 3 hours of continuous GPS tracking. The screen on time for Snapdragon was slightly higher at 2 hours and 33 minutes, while the Exynos it was 2 hours and 30 minutes. I was just reaching out to the Snapdragon version more towards the end. Before going back to Vienna by train, I took some more pictures and videos of the city. In general, the main difference between the two phones is that Exynos makes the pictures more dramatic with higher contrast, which sometimes makes the objects in the scene not visible. Snapdragon makes the photos look a bit softer as highlights are not overblown. Also, I took a picture of the sunset with the iPhone 14 and S24 Exynos, and I feel Samsung captured more details in this specific scenario, and the picture is more clear. We took the train back to Vienna. I planned to do some night photography, but it didn't seem like Exynos was going to make it before it got dark. I used the Snapdragon half an hour more than the Exynos variant, but nevertheless, the Exynos variant is 19% behind the Snapdragon. To drain the batteries to zero, I did the traditional task of playing Anna until one phone went to zero, and Exynos died at 9 PM while the Snapdragon still had 21% juice left. So it gave me the opportunity to check once more whether there was any word left when we went back to Vienna, or if it was better to just stay in Bratislava and enjoy the last minutes of it. I did some more photography with the Snapdragon and did some web browsing. When we got home around midnight, the Snapdragon still had 17% left. Now we can take a look at the temperature chart together. As you can see, the average of both phones are very similar. They both run quite hot since it's a small phone, and it's hard to get the thermals right. Seems like updates fix the Exynos to an extent. One theory that someone wrote in the comments section is that they may have undervolted the Exynos variant, but I cannot confirm or deny that. In terms of power consumption, it is still far behind the Snapdragon variant. As you can see, the power consumption chart, it used 20% more power when the screen was on, which is in turn affected the battery life. Also, the signal strength is still inferior on Exynos compared to the Snapdragon variant. So this test is gonna conclude all the tests that I've done. In all the tests that I've done, the Exynos variant is 10 to 20% less efficient in terms of battery life compared to the Snapdragon variant. In terms of thermals, in the first test that I've done, there was quite a huge gap between the Snapdragon and Exynos variants, but recently after the updates, the gap is not as big as it used to be. This is the last time that I'm gonna do such a test. In future tests, I'm gonna compare the A17 from Apple and also Tensor G3 from Pixel to a Snapdragon and Exynos variants. So please subscribe to not miss that video. If you like this video, you're also gonna either like the camera comparison that I've done for S24, Exynos, and Snapdragon versus the Galaxy S24 Ultra, or you are gonna like the video that I made to compare S23 versus S24 Snapdragon versus S24 Exynos. Thanks for tuning into TechMo. Until the next one, bye!